Concerns about Pakistan's nuclear assets are not new. The country has major political and social challenges to tackle, and at the same time, Pakistan has the fastest growing nuclear stockpile, which could reach 150 to 200 according to some experts. Now, rapid nuclear asset growth is not the only thing that the world finds disturbing. How safe are Pakistan's nuclear weapons is a question that remains difficult for Pakistan to answer, even when US itself puts its confidence in Pakistani government's ability to safeguard and secure its nuclear weapons and material. So when articles with titles such as "Ally from Hell" appear in US magazines pointing out towards inadequate security around Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, most Pakistanis describe such reports as a show of desperation on the part of the United States. And at the same time, Pakistanis do want to know if their country is building its nuclear strength in a safe and rational manner. Also, with reports of Pakistan's neighbor Iran saying that it won't budge an iota from its atomic course, what are the issues that are actually surrounding safety of Pakistan's nuclear weapons? This and lots more trending tonight on the platform. My name is Waqas Rafique. I'm present here in the Islamabad studios of Express 24/7, and with me I have a panel of distinguished guests, familiar faces here on the platform. Dr. Sultan, Director General of SASI. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Sultan. And Mansoor Ahmed Khan. He is also a well-known defense analyst affiliated with the National Defense University and the Qaid-e-Azam University here in Islamabad. Mansoor, thanks a lot for joining us again. Let's cross over now live to Washington DC studios of Voice of America, where my colleague from there, Ayesha Tanzeem, is waiting with her guest. Hello, Ayesha.
Hello, Waqas, and welcome to the Voice of America studios in Washington. We are going to talk about Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, as you mentioned. And here to talk about that today is a guest who has 50 years of experience in nuclear disarmament and national security fields. He also co-founded the Stimson Center. Dr. Blechman, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Blechman, Waqas, my colleague in Islamabad, mentioned an article in the Atlantic magazine called "The Ally from Hell." This is not the first time that concerns have been raised about Pakistan's nuclear arsenal and security. But the article alleges that Pakistan is more concerned about the US taking out or neutralizing its nuclear arsenal than the Taliban. Is there any independent evidence backing this claim?
No, there's not, and I find that claim to be totally incredible. I can't imagine that the U.S. would undertake an operation like that. One, it would be hugely difficult because Pakistan has a very substantial number of weapons. And two, we do consider Pakistan our ally, and that would be a hostile act. The action taken against bin Laden was not directed at Pakistan. It was directed at this man who had killed 3,000 Americans. So that was a completely different thing.
Dr. Blechman, what you mentioned is what the U.S. side is saying, that they will never do it. Is there indication that on the Pakistani side there's concern that the U.S. might do it? I mean, is there a suspicion on their side?
My colleagues in Islamabad might know more about that than I would, but the article's report that Pakistan was so concerned that it was moving its weapons around and, in fact, through ordinary city streets, I find completely incredible. One, I don't know how those authors would know such a thing. Two, I know at least one of them is very unreliable. And three, I just find the whole notion preposterous. It sounds more like a TV program than real life.
Then let's ask the guests in Islamabad. Dr. Sultan, is the Pakistani side concerned that the U.S. might try to neutralize its weapons?
I think I'll agree with what your colleague Mr. Gary said, that we do not believe that any rational government in Washington would take an endeavor which is definitely not going to lead to any successful outcome. That's the first thing as far as Pakistani side is concerned. But nonetheless, whenever you deal with any kind of contingency planning, on the Pakistani side also, Pakistan has to foresee and cannot just totally disregard all such reports which come about. There's always contingency planning done for securing your sites, both from internal as well as from external encounters which may come about in the future. So in this case, anybody who would have any kind of a potential design against Pakistani facilities of the Pakistani program will be considered. So to say this thing, whether Pakistan actually believes that the United States will carry out such an action, I don't think anybody in Islamabad seriously believes that this can be done. But what you do expect from the Pakistani side is also to do similar kind of contingency planning and war gaming to see if or not there's any kind of an attempt to sabotage any kind of Pakistani activity, what would be the possible Pakistani options. So I think that exercise would be happening, and I think that is a legitimate thing which is done world over and not specific to Pakistan. It is something common to all nuclear weapon states. But other than that, I quite agree with what Washington, your colleague, has said.
Would that include, Dr. Sultan, would that include moving the nuclear arsenal around from place to place?
I don't think so. I think the claim which has been made by the Atlantic Council is both outrageous and totally ludicrous, because as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan acquired its capability as early as 1982-83, and if we believe that, then it means that any time there is any kind of a crisis situation, Pakistan will start moving its arsenal. It does not have any fixed silos, does not have any protected sites, and we are doing this since 1982-83. This means that Pakistan would have an extremely reliable road system, an extremely active hair trigger alert kind of a stance, which is definitely not the case. And this is just preposterous to believe that we would, in any kind of a crisis or instant knee-jerk reaction, would be to do that. After May 2nd, yes, there was a total sense of disbelief and shock in Pakistan that the United States would carry out such an operation, but there was confluence or convergence of interest as far as counterterrorism was concerned. But when it comes to Pakistan's nuclear program, it's altogether a different thing. And it did not automatically lead to Pakistan activating its nuclear security procedures in a sense that it will start taking out its arsenal and start putting it on the roads. It's just totally out of the box and just not possible.
Right. So Dr. Maria, you and Dr. Barry agree about your comments actually do match about the article Ally from Heaven. I just want to bring in Mansoor here. What did cross your mind when you first read this article? And it's clearly mentioned, and one of the things that has grabbed the most attention here in Pakistani press also is the fact that vans are reportedly being used to move these weapons away from the eyes of US intelligence, you know.
Well, I'll only add to the argument made by Maria, my colleague here. I think my first reaction was that such claims are fantastic, to say the least. They would make very good material for a thriller story, but otherwise they are based on highly speculative sources, and the veracity of such sources which have been used by the authors need to be put to test. Secondly, Pakistan has had over 3 decades of experience in not only making nuclear weapons, but the delivery means and the fissile material and the means of storing these materials and the weapons. And we've had certain crisis situations. We had an 86-87 crisis, we had the 1990 crisis, the Kargil crisis, the 2002 crisis and the 2008 crisis. So we've had an abundant experience of actually going from a peacetime situation to a crisis situation, and Pakistan would follow the international best practices followed by all other nuclear weapon states in such situations.
Okay, like it was said in the beginning of the program, Dr. Sultan, that concerns about Pakistan's nuclear arsenal are not new. We've been hearing a lot about the speed with which Pakistan is expanding its nuclear weapons, and now this article recently focuses on the security of the Pakistani nuclear weapons. And remember that after 9/11, when Pakistan chose to be a part of the war on terror, there were renewed concerns about Pakistan's nuclear weapon safety because of how terrorists would turn against Pakistan for siding with the United States. And Pakistan has always maintained, by the way, even the then President General Musharraf has been saying that there is no question of Pakistan's nuclear weapons falling into the hand of terrorists. But who would believe us, Dr. Sultan? Because I think that these statements are untested, the claims that Pakistan has been making regarding the security.
I think, Waqas, the facts speak for themselves. And in this case, it's not what Pakistan claims. It is what Pakistan has put into practice. When we dealt with the situation of AQ Khan, the state did not deal with it on a complacent angle. There was corrective action which was taken, there was legislative procedures which were put in place, there were security divisions and the security apparatus which was put in question, and for that we have an entire division which is the Strategic Plans Division, which is Pakistan's Nuclear Secretariat, which looks after that. There are more than 8,000 personnel, security personnel, which form concentric circles of security. And when we talk about terrorist organizations or even people with religious leanings having a certain access to a nuclear weapon, let's see what we are talking about. Are we talking about access to a facility? And access to a facility does not translate into threat automatically. There are physical barriers to it, there are protective measures to it, there are delay practices which are put in place, and Pakistan has adopted all of them. Not only that Pakistan has adopted all of them, it's a continuous process in which you're continuously modifying that. Then comes the second question of as to how much do we need to be transparent about it. That transparency, purely because of the nature of the subject itself, has to be limited and has to be guided by the security environment in which we are. And then comes the third assumption, which is usually been put in place. That means that if something happens on the outer perimeter of, say, a facility maybe which starts maybe 30 kilometers away, does not automatically translate into nuclear terrorism threat. And according to various reports which are put in place, if there is a threat of nuclear terrorism, it is more likely to come out from non-nuclear weapon states or from civilian nuclear facilities rather than from countries which have got actual weapons grade material. This is the most prime possession, and if you have a prime possession, you also ensure that there are relevant security procedures which are put in place. There are various technical measures which have been put in place, various personnel, personnel reliability programs which have been put in place, and then there is concentric circles.
This is quite a complex and technical issue, and the people on the streets do not understand that. I just want to go back to Washington, DC now with Dr. Barry. You just heard what Dr. Sultan said and what Mansoor had to say, Dr. Barry. So what do you think? Do you think it's Pakistan the only country that has issues and that has lots to do about securing its nuclear weapons, or are there other countries too that have had similar issues to tackle regarding their nuclear weapons?
No, all the nuclear weapon states have had issues, and it is reassuring to hear, and I'm sure the Pakistani government has put these various procedures in place and is doing the best it can to secure the weapons and the weapons grade material. But accidents happen, mistakes happen. All the nuclear weapon states have had accidents. The U.S. just a few years ago, some weapons were flown from one location to another on a B-52, and we didn't even know, the authorities didn't even know they were live weapons on that aircraft, and they sat unprotected on an airfield. And the U.S. has enormous procedures in place and very elaborate ones. So, I mean, it is reassuring, and I'm sure the authorities are doing the best they can, but one can never be 100% confident.
Dr. Barry, since you've already mentioned accidents happened, it's happened. Waqas, do you want to ask something? I think you're...
I wanted to build upon what Dr. Barry was just saying, Ayesha, and I wanted to find out then why so much concern about the safety of Pakistan's nuclear weapons, because that's the question that ordinary Pakistanis ask when they go through articles such as the one that appeared in the Atlantic, and at the same time when they hear official reaction from the United States which says that US does have full confidence in Pakistani government's ability to safeguard its nuclear assets.
Well, please don't take that article seriously. As I said, it was ludicrous, the charges made there. But people in America are worried because we see a chaotic situation in Pakistan. We see successful terrorist attacks on core military facilities. We see continuing conflict between various groups, between religious factions, between ethnic factions, and naturally we're worried. The concern is not so much of a terrorist stealing a weapon as to the stability of the entire nation and of the organizations that are taking care of these weapons. That's our concern. And Pakistan, of all the nuclear weapon states, Pakistan seems to be the least stable of them.
The least stable. And I want to take your question, put it to Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, Pakistan always says, why us? Why is everybody concerned about us? But when you take the country and take an objective look at it, in a country where its own naval base is attacked and sources say that inside information is involved, all the attacks on ISI buses and ISI safe houses, people say, sources say, inside information must have been involved. When you have, attacks on your own military personnel, including the Chief of Army Staff and President, why should the world not be concerned?
Well, Pakistan has suffered quite a lot in the war on terror, and these incidents have taken place as a consequence of that. But having said that, the attack on the naval base has got nothing to do with the safety of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. Pakistan would not be, it would be stupid to assume that Pakistan would be storing its nuclear weapons in ISI safe houses or in naval bases close to thickly populated centers. And the security of the physical assets that are on ground, the fuel cycle facilities and the other laboratories have not been compromised. There have been no reported incidents of attacks on actual facilities. Secondly, storage of the weapons themselves is something which would be known to a handful of individuals, and claims made by authors such as those of the Atlantic story.
Point that the security of the facilities have not been compromised, but we want to ask about the security of the personnel and whether there is any indication that that may have been compromised due to inside information. But we'll ask you that question right after this break. Welcome back. And Mr. Khan, as I was saying before the break, why should people not be concerned that some place somewhere inside Pakistan, somebody's sympathies may be with the wrong people on the inside and they may help the wrong people?
Well, those who are entrusted with the task of securing Pakistan's nuclear infrastructure and the weapons fall under the Strategic Plans Division, which has a dedicated security division comprising of more than 10,000 personnel, and there is a very strong personnel reliability program that has been instituted for over a decade, which ensures that no fundamentalist or extremist tendencies exist amongst those who are entrusted with this task. Secondly, there are multiple layers of intelligence which take care of, which look after the habits of those people who are actually there to ensure the physical security of the weapons and the sites, and any linkages with any extremist organizations are nipped in the bud, or one can safely assume that these practices are followed as part of the personal reliability program, because the compromise, the security and the safety of
No, I was going to ask you, Dr. Blechman, on the U.S. side, are they concerned about this, or are they happy with the positions in place, the practices in place that Mr. Khan just described?
The officials of the U.S. government are pretty happy with the security procedures that Pakistan has put in place. Most officials who are informed about these say that Pakistan has developed a very effective infrastructure to protect them. But
so then what are the major concerns?
The concerns are broader. The concerns are that when we look at the ties between the Pakistani army and ISI, particularly, and the terrorist organizations, one can't help wonder whether these connections could not be somehow used to penetrate the nuclear establishment, first. Secondly, the concern is this continuing effort by Pakistan to not only build more weapons, but to continue to expand its capacity to build weapons. We don't understand why Pakistan could possibly want such a large production capacity. I mean, what is the ultimate goal for its arsenal? This has to be a concern to any nation. It's certainly a concern to Pakistan's neighbors.
Waqas?
Yeah, Ayesha, our guest here would like to react to what Dr. Barry just said. Let's begin with Dr. Sultan first.
I think it's always interesting to hear this argument which comes through Washington very clearly, that Pakistan invariably has got links, and Pakistani security agencies have got links with terrorist organizations, and that is actually going to translate into Pakistani nuclear weapons falling into the hands of the terrorists. Let's see what is it when we talk about nuclear terrorism, what is it that we're talking about? We're talking about access to nuclear fissile material, which is of highly enriched, which consists of basically two materials, ATU, which is weapons grade, or for that matter plutonium, which has been reprocessed to a level which can be considered enough to be part of a potential terrorism attack. Then comes the sabotage of a facility, and when you have concentric circles of security, then it means that you put in sufficient levels of checks and balances to ensure, one, that even if there is a breach at one level, there is another level which tries to counteract that, and that technically it's not possible that you walk into a facility and you take enough fissile material then blow it up, or you bring down an entire nuclear facility just because there is a handful of people who want to do that, because there are various procedures which have been put in place. So on the technical issue, nuclear weapons are very different from conventional issues, conventional facilities, so to speak. And the second...
So are the security issues that are involved.
Yeah, and I think that basically outlines the fact that, it's altogether a different ballgame. The second question which has been argued, or which we keep on hearing, is that Pakistan has got one of the world's fastest growing nuclear program.
Yeah.
And I think that assertion also needs a closer inspection, whether or not that's true or not. And how do these people come for this assessment? Are they having sufficient insight into the Pakistani nuclear capability to think that Pakistan is developing that? What is it that Pakistan is facing conventionally? Pakistan is facing a very aggressive, preemptive military, conventional Indian military cold start doctrine, which is coming from the Indian side, which says that in the case of any kind of a terrorist attack, India will launch 8 successive attacks into Pakistani territory, and these attacks will be done at, they would be pre-delegated, and they would be done immediately within 72 hours before they believe that the international response can come in. So in this case, you're perpetually putting the Pakistani side on a very different mechanism of level of alert, or coming up with the concept of preemptive or anticipatory defense, which is coming from India. And when you're putting this on one side, on the second side, the military is also using the threat which is facing from the western side. Yeah. This means that you would overtly rely on nuclear weapons to deter.
Pakistan's fight with India as an excuse for its nuclear arsenal. But I'd like to put this question to Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, how many weapons are enough for deterrence? Between Pakistan and India, is it 2, is it 5, is it 100? How many weapons does Pakistan need as a deterrent against India?
I'd just like to say just something before I can just ask my colleague to fill in. It's not a question of how many weapons do you have. It's a question of what kind of response you're dealing with, what kind of military preparedness you're dealing with on the other side, and what level of nuclear deterrence posture you would require. Whether you would require tactical weapons to ensure that you have filled up all gaps for establishing deterrent stability or not. Pakistan has never been the first country to detonate, has never been the first country to operationalize its nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, the situation which it has been dealing on the Eastern Front has led Pakistan to think differently.
Right, very interesting. And Mansoor, you said earlier about the personnel who are responsible for the security of weapons, that their, if I may put it this way, that their ideologies are closely watched, right? But we also keep on hearing about the links that elements within the Pakistan army have with terrorist organizations. That's what we heard today. That's we've been hearing for quite some time. So what would you say to that?
Well, again, those people in the military who are involved in the safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear program, in the physical infrastructure and the weapons, are closely handpicked, and they are trained and they are monitored. There are multiple layers of intelligence that basically monitor their habits, their dealings, their interactions with different kinds of people, because Pakistan's nuclear weapons are considered, and are rightly so, as the crown jewels of our capability. As regards the assertion that Pakistan has the fastest growing program, it's very convenient to say that, but it's equally convenient for others who make such claims to ignore India's potential of making weapons right now. India has enough fissile material, weapon grade and reactor grade plutonium, to make more than 1,120 warheads. They have a rapidly expanding uranium enrichment program. But it's also being
said, Mansoor, that India no longer considers Pakistan its competitor. It's thinking beyond Pakistan.
But then Pakistan cannot be oblivious to the military developments that are taking place across the border. The threat that emanates from India has to be catered for in our security calculus. And it's not to suggest that Pakistan is in some sort of an arms race with India. The credibility of the country's minimum deterrence posture has to be maintained. The posture is not static, it is dynamic, it will be sensitive to the threat. As the threat evolves, Pakistan will have to respond accordingly.
Okay, let's bring in the
Mr. Khan, you're just saying, keep talking about...
could I please continue with this question, Ayesha?
Go ahead, Waqas.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Maria, what about the instability factor that we keep on hearing? Like I said earlier, it's been 10 years after 9/11 since Pakistan chose to become a partner in the war against terrorism, and the talk of instability, political instability in Pakistan is still there. So do you think that the concerns regarding the safety are valid because of this? Because if we talk about deterrence also, you know, political will is also...
Yes, political will is always something which lies central to the deterrence debate. But when we talk about the larger question of stability, and when we talk about terrorism, we have to understand what is it that we are dealing with. We are dealing with transnational threats to international security and terrorism, which is not confined to Pakistan. It's a global problem which it has to be dealt globally. Pakistan cannot be responsible for the threats of global terrorism which are emanating. Yes, what we can do is try to address them. Whenever you're having a developed state, for example, you would have, like if a public facility in Pakistan gets blown up by a terrorist, it is something which is going to make international news. If Pentagon gets attacked, which it did, despite the fact that it's got one of the world's best security, and that is, their command center. If that gets attacked, so the attack on the PN naval base and all of that requires more efforts. But the biggest question here at the center of that is whether or not the state is complacent, whether or not you're trying to take corrective action. And I think on both of these accounts, one we can say very clearly is that yes, we are dealing with the problem as it is. We're trying to reduce various sources of terrorism which are coming in as a result of the consequence which is happening in Afghanistan, as a result of building up their own narrative understanding. And secondly, also taking corrective measures in terms of legislative measures, in terms of enforcement measures, in terms of practical measures, technical measures. All of these efforts are being taken in. And if you just look at the cases, Pakistan is not the only country. Israel will also stand out very clearly, where they're dealing with Hezbollah, they're dealing with Hamas, they're dealing with other factions, and they're dealing with the
Dr. Sultan, you mentioned that Pakistan's taking corrective measures. Dr. Sultan, you mentioned that Pakistan's taking corrective measures. I will ask that question of Dr. Blechman. Dr. Blechman, is the nuclear disarmament community in US happy with the corrective measures that Dr. Sultan measured are being taken?
Certainly we're pleased that Pakistan is taking measures to strengthen the security, but there is the underlying issue of this delusion Pakistan has that adding nuclear weapons will add to its security. This will not happen. Nuclear weapons are useless to fight wars. They will not stop maneuvering armored divisions. This is what NATO learned in its confrontation with the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact. Each side had thousands of nuclear weapons, and in the end, we understood that these nuclear weapons would kill millions of civilians, destroy cities, but they could not stop maneuvering armored divisions. So Pakistan is under this delusion that it needs these hundreds of weapons to stop the Indian Cold Start offensive. This is not going to happen. You should pray that there is no war with India, because all that will happen is nuclear weapons will be used. There'll be a horrible situation in terms of civilian casualties on both sides, and in the end, the war will be won by lost by conventional forces.
Let's move on to another issue, because we can go back and forth about how many weapons Pakistan needs or does not need. There's another thing that I read, and you as an expert can tell me. Pakistan uses enriched uranium as opposed to plutonium, which is used in many countries around the world. And there is some concern in the nuclear disarmament community that enriched uranium, if smuggled out of the facility somehow or stolen, which happens around the world, can be used in a rather simple gun and barrel type bombs and can produce a dirty bomb.
Yes, there is some danger of that, and there is a danger from that just from uranium or other radioactive materials from civilian facilities, as one of our colleagues in Islamabad said. But radiological weapons are, they could kill some people, they would be a bad situation, but it's not the same as a nuclear explosion. And building an actual weapon that would explode is very difficult, and I don't think a terrorist organization could do it unless it had a protected facility being protected by a government.
Now, when Russia was disintegrating, the U.S. worked with the Russians and gave them money.
Ayesha, if we could have the comments from the guests here, please. They want to react to what Dr. Barry was saying. Yes, Mansoor?
Yes, Pakistan uses highly enriched uranium and plutonium as fissile material for its nuclear weapons. Now, as regards the assertion that probably highly enriched uranium can be used in a dirty bomb, now, as has been just said, highly enriched uranium can only be used in a weapon when the trigger mechanism works, and making the core of the weapon, which comprises highly enriched uranium, compressing that core requires a lot of precision, which is beyond the technical ability of any single group or individual.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, yes, even if it comes to the question of making a gun type device like the one that was dropped on Hiroshima, that would itself require a neutron source and a gun barrel, and converting the highly enriched uranium into metallic form before it is suitable to be used in the weapon. And with regard to plutonium, you can only use that in implosion devices, and making an implosion device is completely out of question for any terrorist group or entity. And equating radiological terrorism with nuclear terrorism is, I don't think that's technically correct. They're two different things.
Do you agree with Mansoor?
Yeah, I think Mansoor has made the point very, very candidly on the fact that, when we hear about terrorists gaining access to a small amount of uranium, it's very critical to see how much amount of uranium or plutonium that they have got access to. And as both the colleagues, both in Washington and here, they have suggested that it's not usually, it's more on the psychological effect that radiological terrorism has occurred rather than the practical implementation or the effect that such a device would have, I think the point which I wanted to make was, it's not a question of Pakistan trying to, fill in the gaps of deterrence by going on a mad race to go for tactical weapons and then thinking to come to a posture. It's a question basically which is centered into the debate in which we feel threat. Yeah. And the whole purpose of deterrence is to ensure that you don't fight a war. Right. We wish that we don't have to fight a war, but nonetheless we have to be prepared for it.
Briefly, Mansoor, before I go to
Thank you very much, Dr. Sultan. I want to add another...
Ayesha, if I could have Mansoor's comment, and then I have a question for Dr. Barry. Yes, Mansoor.
Yeah, now India is going for a massive program to build a nuclear submarine force for developing second strike capability. They are inducting anti-ballistic missile systems as well, and they are the single largest net importer of high-tech conventional weapons. And they are predicted to import weapons worth more than $150 billion in the next decade. Pakistan clearly cannot remain oblivious to this, to the build-up that is happening across the world.
Mr. Khan, you keep talking about conventional weapons. We're talking about the nuclear weapons.
Yes, but you see, on the nuclear side also, India is thinking of operationalizing the nuclear triad. And in addition to that, there is also a great possibility of India having a strategic fuel reserve. And when you are seeing all these weapon systems, with India having no binding non-proliferation agreement, which is linked to the Indo-US deal, we have serious problems as to how do we structure this chartered arms race in the region.
Okay, go ahead, Ayesha.
No, I was going to ask Dr. Blechman if you want to respond to any of the comments, but then the next point I want to bring in is, when Russia was disintegrating and it was unstable, the US put a lot of money, worked with the Russian government in order to secure the nuclear sites, so the material was not smuggled in any way. You mentioned that the US is concerned that Pakistan is not stable. To what extent is it working with the Pakistani government to make sure that the nuclear sites are safe?
Well, we did work with the Pakistani government in the past to provide our experience and knowledge about how to secure these weapons and the procedures and so forth. So there has been cooperation. I don't know if there is cooperation currently. I doubt it, given that the relationship has cooled so considerably in recent years. But I'd also comment that I certainly regret India's movement toward greater nuclear capabilities, and it certainly has the potential, although it's not building weapons as quickly as Pakistan. It's obvious to an outsider looking at this conflict between India and Pakistan virtually my entire lifetime to say it's time to reach peace. It's time gradually to take the steps, and there certainly has been progress recently to end this conflict.
Dr. Barry, Ayesha, if we could ask Dr. Barry this question. We've been talking about dangers and threats, going back to the topic of today, the safety issues surrounding Pakistan's nuclear weapons. So we've been talking about threats, Dr. Barry. What if, let's imagine for a second, what if the terrorists actually do manage to get hold of Pakistan's nuclear weapons? So given the complex repercussions and issues surrounding nuclear weapons, what options do you think would the United States have then, if that happens ever?
I don't know, but I assume that the United States has contingency plans in which it would try, if it would, one, hopefully know if weapons had fallen into terrorist hands, and two, we certainly have various options by which we could try to regain control of those weapons. And I would think we would work with the Pakistani authorities to make that happen.
And we need to take a break. We'll be right back, and we'll ask you maybe what some of those options that U.S. has, but we have to take this break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back from the break. You're watching The Platform, and tonight we're examining issues related to the security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons. And before we went on the break, I presented the scenario in which we assumed for a second if a terrorist actually did get their hands on Pakistan's nuclear weapons. And when we asked that question to Dr. Barry, he said that if that happens, US would have contingency plans. I'll be going to get more explanation on the contingency plans, Dr. Barry, but first, guest here in Islamabad, what do you think about that, contingency plans that the US might have if Pakistani weapons ever fell in the hands of terrorists?
I think the two contingency plans which were also cited in the Atlantic article were also one that they would do a small systematic raid like May 2nd that will lead to securing the asset which they believe is claimed loose, or they could come up against all Pakistani facilities. I think both of these assertions require a little bit of inquiry. Whether they can actually carry out a May 2nd kind of an event in the case of Pakistan's nuclear facility is totally out of the question, because that would mean that they would be confronted with at least all those concentric circles of security, one. Number two, that it would also have to assume that the Pakistani side is on board with the US. And in this case, I think there is going to be a conflict of interest, so to speak, unless and until there is a greater understanding towards it. The second question, that they could take out all Pakistani assets, is out of the question, because even if CENTCOM, which is not more than 100,000, or Pacific Command, which comes in to come and carry out such operations, cannot guarantee 100% decapping or denuclearizing Pakistan's assets, one. And number two, will not be in a situation to actually come and secure and move out of Pakistan without Pakistan having the option to retaliate.
Right.
And that option has to be considered whenever such kind of an action would be taken.
You think that Pakistan would be part of those contingency plans?
No, I don't think so. Pakistan would be part of it, and if such an action is taken, from Pakistan's perspective, it would be considered as a direct act of war, and can lead to a situation which would be very difficult to handle
Mansoor,
for any party.
Before we go to Dr. Barry, Mansoor, very quickly, what do you think on this?
I think such scenarios will only add to the mistrust between Pakistan and the United States, and will add fuel to the misperceptions on both sides, especially in the Pakistani mindset, that the United States and the Western media is out there to build a case to make public opinion go against Pakistan as a responsible state which is capable of supervising the security of its arsenal, and ultimately taking over the arsenal itself.
Ayesha, you had a question regarding contingency plans that you wanted to ask Dr. Barry, right?
No, I was just going to ask Dr. Berry, what are some of the contingency plans, and can you also answer some of the concerns raised by our Pakistani guests?
Yes, certainly. I don't know what the contingency plans are, but I think it's safe to assume that plans are being made. I don't believe that there are any plans or anyone would have any intention of trying to seize the entire Pakistani arsenal. As I said, that's a huge job. It would be a hostile act against a country we're trying to be friends with, and it would not be considered. The contingency I was speaking of was one in which somehow an extremist organization had control of a few number of weapons. And in that contingency, I would think the U.S. would act together with the Pakistani government to regain control of the weapons. We could provide intelligence, and we could provide special forces to cooperate with the Pakistani government to regain control of the weapons. I'm not talking about some sort of hostile action.
Now, what you've said again and again is the U.S. officials are okay with the Pakistanis and the way they defend their weapons. Why then these concerns keep coming up? Is it genuine concerns in the arms control community, or is it propaganda by the press?
I think they're certainly genuine concerns, and anyone looking at the situation in Pakistan, particularly 6 months to 12 months ago, you know, has a right to be concerned. There's a lot of conflict. We all feel very sorry for Pakistan. Pakistan does bear the brunt of the war on terror, but there is also you know, people do these things to get articles published. I mean, this last one is a totally ridiculous article. And one of the authors last summer was writing an article saying he knew that Israel was planning an attack on Iran last summer, which was proved to be false.
So before we go to Islamabad, we have very few minutes. I want to get your opinion. So forget this article, it's preposterous. What are some of the genuine concerns?
The genuine concern, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Pakistan could fall into a more anarchic state in which the conflicts that exist among the different groups continue to escalate, the level of violence, the frequency of violence escalates, and you have, you know, widespread civil conflict in the country that the army is unable to control, or the army itself begins to splinter along different lines. And that in such a situation, who would maintain control of the weapons is uncertain.
So please compare it to what happened in Russia when it was disintegrating. And I'm not saying Pakistan is in any way close to that strait, but I'm saying the instability and who controlled the weapons and how did they come under control, and how can Pakistan learn from that?
It's a very good analogy, and it was an extremely dangerous situation. The Soviet Union fell apart. The weapons, for the most part, remained under the control of the element of the military intelligence which controlled them. And the weapons remained under control, except for weapons in states which were no longer part of the Soviet Union. Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, each had their own weapons. And fortunately, the U.S. was able to persuade those countries to return those weapons to Russia and to return the fissile material as well. But it was a very iffy situation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blechman. I think we'll be wrapping up from Washington, but here are questions for our guests in Islamabad. You want to answer his questions, but also Pakistan is going through a very difficult situation. There are terrorist attacks almost every day on civilians and on the military itself. Why should not the world be concerned? That's the answer for you guys. Waqas, take it over.
All right, Ayesha, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Barry. Dr. Sultan, I want to begin with you. The comments that we heard suggest that Pakistan is the type of a country, given its socio-political environment, that should not have nuclear weapons in the first place.
Because I think this is an argument which Pakistan has been hearing since its inception, that Pakistan is a failed state, Pakistan is about to go into crisis, Pakistan is about to disintegrate, and consequently Pakistani institutions are also failing. The reality of the matter is this, that Pakistan is one of the countries which has had the most successful counter-terrorism operations, whether you talk about Swat, whether you talk about South Waziristan, whether you talk about actually also bringing down the frequency of the terrorist attacks which we're dealing with. On the other hand, we have got 45 countries of NATO and others which have not been able to even get a semblance of security in Afghanistan. We have had problems, we're dealing with the challenges, but it doesn't mean that the state of Pakistan is about to implode. What does happen by creating all these perceptions is that you're creating false perceptions. For example, the case of the former Soviet Union has got nothing to do with the case of Pakistan. The Pakistani state, the way Pakistan sees its nuclear weapons, and also the concentric approach which was used under the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program to prove to the former Soviet Union states that their nuclear assets were not a good thing.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Mansoor, one final comment. Do you think that, keeping in mind Pak-US relations, can Pakistan learn anything or take advice from the US regarding better securing its nuclear weapons?
I think Pakistan is self-sufficient in adopting international best practices to secure its weapons, and as far as the civilian safeguarded facilities are concerned, we already have active cooperation with the IAEA.
Okay, thank you so much, Mansoor, and thank you so much, Dr. Mari Sultan, for joining us here on the platform. And let's hope that Pakistan continues to adopt those strategies that would further secure its nuclear weapons. I thank my guests in Washington, D.C., Dr. Barry and Blechman, and also my colleague from there, Ayesha, Tanzeem, and the entire Voice of America team. Also, a special thank you to you for watching the platform. I'm Waqas Rafique. Good night.